Greetings, folks. So, subjective intuiting or introverted intuition. So, this is my best attempt at trying to describe it, because I do believe it is a real process, a real mental verb. And I'll get into that later. So, I would frame it as the function most related to the unconscious, specifically inarticulable insights into the personal collective unconscious. And in general, when you ask these NJs to give examples, eventually by the fourth hangout on it, when interviewing them, they will give a few examples. So see the relevant event that I did with Haley and Jonathan. So I would say what is related to this is faith. Now I need to explain what I mean by faith. So yes, it's that a sense of knowing something is true in the absence of evidence or reason which can be put into words. And so this would be a contradiction within, say, INTJ, NIT, the contender rational, that's evidence-based, but also has this linear intuition. So archetypes, where in these sort of archetypal patterns through time that are repeated through time. I suppose one person's archetype is another person's stereotype, or we could say that an archetype is a stereotype without the baggage and that works and has the sort of the ring of truth to it, rather than being a sort of a simplification to help somebody sort of make sense of the world. Archetypes are usually a bit more abstract than a stereotype. It would be an interesting video to compare the archetype versus the stereotype in, say, archetypal characters. Which character is an archetype versus which character is a stereotype. So yeah, and it might depend on someone's type how that is viewed. But as for the archetypes that Jung was mentioning, what he did was he was pretty empirical about the archetypes. Is that he looked at and he wanted to look at the case notes of people who were going into analytical psychology analysis and their dreams, because he wondered if he was projecting it into the client. So he looked at other people's notes of other therapists, and he was able to see these same archetypal images in dreams were cropping up. And he went to the United States and he looked at Black patients in Washington, D.C., I think, and he noticed the same archetypes. And then now we're getting to more of a practical application to sort of show that archetypes are real, in that Joseph Campbell studied Jung, or at least that part about archetypes, and he looked at a lot of myths, and he showed how this repeated, and he wrote that book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which George Lucas read, and along with being heavily inspired by Foundation and by Dune is American. He used the Campbell plot, the hero's journey, and used these archetypal characters and plot elements from Dune and Foundation, such as the planet that's a whole city. What is that, Trantor? But then becomes Coruscant. Anyhow, So these archetypal elements, those weren't archetypal elements, but in terms of the characters, like the Yoda, which is the sort of the mentor to the hero. So, and then Christopher Vogler did the hero's journey, it's sort of a more easily digestible form of and then also think it's David Kaplan. Let me just check his name. Is it David Kaplan? No, Steve Kaplan did the comic hero's journey. Yeah, so there are these archetypes there. And then also foresight not based on reason. So, for example, I would say that Peter Schiff doing a lot of economic foresight, it's based on reason that when you've got a load of debt and you can sort of go, well, if they raise interest rates, people are not going to be able to pay back these adjustable loans and everything will collapse. And so then they won't raise interest rates and they'll inflate instead. So that's based on reason rather than a sort of a mystical NI. Yeah, I've seen this movie before. Now for insights, all Jungian cognitive functions can lead to a JCF-based insight which can cross into the realm of thought for interpretation. Insights are highly correlated to focus of attention. An insight tends to be about what one's attention is focused on. Someone's lead function is likely that person's most insightful function. So, for example, an FE Dom could hear something in a tone of voice or a facial expression, affect display, and lead that person and have insights in that realm because it's the focus of attention. The INTP in the accommodative rational in conversation might focus on someone's understanding and look out for little pedantic things that they learn not to mention. So they'll focus on the person's reasoning. Idealist may focus on someone's values and looking for integrity, congruency. The ESTP may have a focus on someone's competence, how someone carries oneself. Can that person do what he or she says it can do? Yeah. Or the focus is on fun with people. So that focus of attention and then insights into that. But these NI insights is more, they can't articulate it. It's almost as if, or maybe it's, and Jung wrote that sometimes you can have the intuition, it pops into consciousness, and sometimes you can work back what was that chain of unconscious associations and where it came from. But sometimes it can pop into consciousness fully formed. So yeah. So if you want to see one of the more intuitive people on this channel is Tamsi. So if you look for the playlist on Tamsi, something like yeah, when she talks about intuition. Right, so I will move on a bit. Yeah, here we go. A quote from Tamsi. Sometimes it's more a waking dream. So she talks about how she literally follows her dreams. Sometimes it's more waking dreams. So I'm awake and things like in the form of visuals or more of like, it's almost like a whooshing feeling. I don't know how to describe it other than just saying that it's something like just whoosh, flows through you. It's a thought. It doesn't necessarily come like in something that you can visually see all the time or necessarily hear, but it's like you hear it with your soul. It just comes through you and you know it. Right. You hear it with your soul. So, Now, an INTJ might do that, but they're never going to say it. Very less likely to say it because they've got that TE. You know, they value the TE. NLP concepts which are features of NI. Yeah, downtime. That inner focus, which is sometimes trance-like. It's almost like daydreaming would be an example of that. Through time, aware of the river of time development. Yeah, Leoben in Battlestar Galactica Mark II, with his dual sort of toxic relationship between him and Kara Thrace, ESTP, Initiator Artisan. So I've not put it on there, but these two NLP concepts, the opposites of those are features of SE. So in time, so it's just like Kersey says about the artisans, in the here and now. So yeah, in time, instead of going through something real in the moment, and so being focused in the moment, situational awareness, and then up time, all the attention is focused outwards. Now, this happens with artisans once there is a sufficient level of stimulation. Then they can focus better than anybody else. So it's usually when it's a high stimulation. So, for example, surgeon. This is where SE is very useful. Surgeon, surgery, piloting a fighter aircraft, being a batter in baseball or cricket. Focus of attention outwards in the moment. Racing car driver, one of the more dangerous sports, if not the most dangerous. And then the values shared by these linear intuitors, NJs. Development. NFJs, about people. Their own personal development. Personal development of the people. Well, it's personal, yeah, so personal development. NTJs, development of projects. And these correlate to some ideas in Kersey. Strategic coordination of resources towards long-term strategic objectives. So you're coordinating, yeah, resources, human and material. And then you've got mentoring people, counseling. If you're counseling someone, that's an example of developing someone. NI attracted to archetypes, yeah, symbols, the unconscious, the paranormal, liminal. So the paranormal, so Newton, I think INTJ, he had a sort of a double life. He had this other half of his personality which was into the paranormal, the occult. Yeah. So liminal space, going down the rabbit hole, that's Tamsin's phrase, mysticism. So this liminal space, she mentioned that a feeling of being on the verge of something. And then Jakar. Again, I do think JMS is an INTJ counterphobic 6. Right in Jakar in Babylon 5. The future is all around us, waiting in moments of transition to be born in moments of revelation. So you're going to have that feeling of being on the verge of something. Right. So now right. And then we're going to sort of like N9 in its extreme. Yeah. Oh, I got a bit of a you can see that. NI related material in the INFJ counselor profile in Please Understand Me Too by David West Curzon. Now, it was also script edited by his son-in-law, Dr. Stephen Montgomery, who was in Kersey typed as a counselor, so a contender Idealist. So an INFJ preferences himself. Most likely of all the types to demonstrate an ability to not all of them, much to their chagrin, not all INFJs can do this. It's probably a small fraction. Most likely of all the types to demonstrate an ability to understand psychic phenomena. Such supernormal intuition is found frequently in INFJs and can extend to people, things, and often events, taking the form of visions, episodes of foreknowledge. So this about the future, foreknowledge, premonitions, it's through time, how events will unfold. Foreknowledge, premonitions, also and visual images of things to come. This is why it's the intuition of development. This is why it's linear. That's why I don't call it intuition time, because if nothing happens through time, so time is, I agree with Kersey that time is of events. So it's like if nothing happens, if there's a place where everything looks the same as it was 20 years ago, they usually say, oh, it's a place where time stood still. So you can say hardly anything happened. So time hardly passed, it stood still. So it's intuition of development. If you have an intuition of how something can develop, then you could say that that's almost like foreknowledge, premonitions, what is going to happen, order to envision of things to come, as well as uncanny communications with certain individuals. So you can see a big part of that is this foresight, which is not reason-based. But you can have, and something I learned this from Dibley, and he got this from a French term, and it's something like intuition réfléchie. I sort of understand it as reflection-based re-intuition. So, for example, the NJ, basically all IN types, can have an intuition, think about it, get an insight about that, and then based on that understanding with thought, have another intuition based on that thinking. So you got that loop. So maybe you can get that, especially in INFJ, with that loop between lead, NI, and tertiary TI. Get that loop. Or with a strong unvalued TI in INTJ, NITI, get that loop. Has an intuition, an idea, thinks about it, and then based on that idea, reflection-based re-intuition. Because you reflected on it consciously via thought, you then have another intuition, insight based on that. So this is show how these mental verbs are real if you experience these in yourself. So for example, if you're paying attention totally and you're in the moment outside of yourself, then SE is a thing, is a verb rather, and it's like I am doing this. SEing exists. It exists. Or so you know it yourself when you are doing the verb. Now sometimes you're gonna be slightly taking yourself out of it because you're gonna be aware of it. It's going to be, but yeah. So, and you can also observe others when they're in these states. But really, it's like being in the mental verb. Right. And then, yeah, Kersey met the great hypnotist Milton H. Erickson and typed in as what I'll call a contender. And I believe he called him a genius before he let Milton Erickson hypnotize him. And even if it was afterwards, then it shows that Erickson was effective. Yeah. And if you just want to know about Milton Erickson's language, I suggest this book, My Voice Will Go With You, with this sort of a teaching tales, and you get an analysis of what he's doing with language. So it's good just for people interested in language. NS will like that book. So it's INFJ and INFP. Right, and then sort of like, we're getting into the subfunctions, my sort of system, but it's not sort of like making it up. It's based on description. So prediction hunches. We've already said, now this is assertive. Because it's like, this is going to happen. So you are asserting. You have a feeling something is going to happen. Foresight crosses into the realm of thought, but starts in NI. Yeah, and then you can have that reflection-based re-intuition. Intuition refleche. I don't know how to pronounce that. I've heard a French person pronounce it, and it's nothing the way I pronounce it. Anyhow. So, developing. That is pretty assertive. I mean, INFJ, I know how to develop you. Like, if you're guiding someone, a counselor, that's pretty assertive. You know what the right. You're guiding somebody out. That's pretty assertive. It's like, you need to go in this direction. Even if they come to you advice, it's an assertive role. It's a contending role. It's a directive role. So you're a mentor in developing someone. You're pretty sure. And so that's where the INFJ are drawing on their NI and FE. Yeah, the directive half occurs is diplomatic, enabling intellect. Yeah, it's pretty assertive. It's just like, another example of assertive is TI. When someone comes up with a system, it's all very symmetrical, like, say, classical socionics, that's very TI assertive. It's even more TI assertive when you assert that all TI is almost like genius. That it's almost as if when you assert that TI is logic and that is as sound as logic, and that as long as it's internally consistent, it's true, you're doing TI assertive by asserting that. If you assert because it's internally consistent, it's true, and that's all that matters, that is assertive TI. Just thinking that way in this sort of, because I've got the 6 and I've got doubts, if you're thinking in that rigid way, it's internally consistent, it's all nice and symmetrical. I got my nice system. Yeah. And for the people who like SHS, that's a bit like L with a plus sign. Yeah. And Victor himself said that classical socionics is like that. Information socionics has this rigid and or view of it. Another example of assertive TI, I would say, is labor theory of value. It's nonsense. Or Keynesianism. Yeah. But anyway, I won't get into that. People, when they really get usually the assertive subfunctions, you got to be very careful when there's an arrogance in there. It's like the person that gets locked into the system and sees everything through the system. Right. And then, okay, NI with thinking. Yeah, as I mentioned before, coordination of resources towards long-term strategic objectives, directive half occurs in strategic building. Like I said, that's pretty assertive. You're going out there, you've got your business plan, and it's like, and if you're explaining that to somebody else, and then it's going to be like this in 10 years, and you probably think, you're pretty confident about that. You're pretty assertive with how you think things are going to develop. Pretty assertive. So assertive NI, so I'm labeling it as that, and I'm pointing to real verbs. That we got this is real. Mentoring people is real, and you can look at them and like listen to their motivations, and they're pretty idealist. Look at their like MBTI preferences, or the NFJ, or they got the idealist words and tools and all this, and it's like, okay, they seem to be doing this assertive NIing. Now, imaginative. This is hard. This is, whenever you get to the imaginative subfunctions, very hard to see. Very hard to see. And this is the hardest to see. So, this is a bit speculative. But and in this instance, I'm thinking deductively. I'm deducting from NI and imaginative. I'm crossing those two concepts. Art and the guiding invisible hand to think in the right direction. Aha, insights and solutions. So this comes from Nardi and it's sort of mentioned by Van der Hoop as well. Yeah, and they say the guiding invisible hand to think in the right direction. So you've got that sense of direction, the linearity part of NI, of going in the right direction. In writing, I've had this thing where it's like, oh, it's not quite good enough, but it can get better, and I have a feeling, an intuition that if I'm going in the right direction. Yeah, so it's a bit of that. Very speculative though. And then I sort of, the way I'm defining it here, maybe describing it, getting a bit of definition in here, leads the sensory imagination to go in the right SI imaginative direction. NI guides SI what to imagine. So this is consistent with how I'm thinking about it, because if you've got mental imagery going on, that's SI, that's sensory. Intuition is abstract. It goes beyond the sensory images. So what I'm saying here is it leads, because Guardians have very good sensory imagination. They read a lot of novels, and they like novels with sensory description, rich sensory description, because it is evocative for them. To go into the right SI imaginative direction, NI guides SI what to imagine. As soon as there are sensory qualities, the product of NII has moved into the realm of SII by definition. So this is me doing quite a lot of deduction and TI with not as much, because there's nothing as concrete that I can point to. Now with this, this is there in the romance style. Because they do like STPs. You know, more for them, but right. Again, what they need is mature ESTP. ESTP with a track record. My advice to INFJs: maybe hook it up with ESTP, ask for references. Right. If only that were a thing. Relates to the submissive aspect of NI and Victor Galenka's romance styles. Yeah, so try to nuance this. Submissive in the sense that, oh yeah, so when it's green, that means it was originally in pen notes. Or it was done on a typewriter. Submissive in the, so from hard copy. Pen or typewriter. Submissive in the sense that NJs and NI wheelhouse types admire and allow those with skilled SE assertive use to take the lead in a dynamic, audacious, free, in the moment, situationally aware way. Now, it's not in all instances. So, for example, if you ask ENFJ women about this, so it might be in the rest of their lives outside of romantic relationships, they could be to use an old-fashioned phrase, the one who wears the trousers, and be that sort of initiator and directive. So it's not submissive all the while, because they've got that interaction style. And even in relationships, they might only be submissive in the bedroom, but then submissive but then more directive in areas outside the bedroom. So it's not, it doesn't mean that, because ENFJ is an initiator. They're not totally they're not submissive. It's in the situationally submissive, I would say. And it doesn't mean they're submissive to all men. It's those men with the right SE. Right. And then NJs, because I asked them about this, and they said that it has to be someone with the right stuff. Someone that the NJ wishes to follow. It's not all STPs. It's the person with the right stuff. NJs also admire the willful external focus of artisans, SE wheelhouse types, to shape their immediate environment in an expeditious way. Yeah. So again, it's going to be like, these are the really highly accomplished artisans, because like they're like 40% of the population. So it's like, if you think about like really high IQ tactical manipulating, right? Where there's sort of SE at its best, where it's like, oh wow, this is not just people hedonistically enjoying themselves and acting in the moment without any thoughts. This is SE, which is so situationally aware, so in the moment, and skill being drawn on. Skill is not SE, but SE relies on skill, just as TI relies on reasoning power, but is not reasoning power. So TI co-ops reasoning power, SE co-ops skill. People can still be artisans without being coordinated. It's just that you could have a type that's got a load of good coordination, but it might be wasted if they don't value SE or SI. Yeah. So that if you see someone and they've got that, because then, and it's if the person's impulses and the person doesn't have baggage, and here's the thing, and then the person's impulses when in SE, it's an impulse based on the situation. And then those impulses are going to be the right impulses, split-second reactions that are faster than thinking, because they are impulses appropriate to the situation, because the person is in the zone. That phrase. Again, only submissive to SE assertive use, which conveys the SP has the right stuff and knows what she is doing. Admiral SE use, in other words. NIH tends to lack the energy to act in a way that SEA can. Yeah, and that's one of the admirable qualities. Get stuff done rather than thinking about it or contemplating it. So there's also this a theme. I remember I did a video with Alexis, and she's married, and she said that for her, the kind of SE that she found attractive was and this is consistent with INTJ female, you could say the musician. So maybe that's something that you could ask INTJ females, and what do you think of male musicians? Is the sort of that use of the SE with feeling? How attractive are musicians to you? So that's a different kind of SE. So it's not just because the socionics focuses too much on SE assertive, the kind of the kind of SE that you see from ESTP. But SE from ESFP is different. It's more this style and flair. Right. Okay, so that is it. And I might make this slide public. It depends. Because I do want to put it in a book. Right. Anyhow, more on that in future. I will now bye-bye. Getty Schiff was right in 2008. The dollar will collapse because, inflation, hyperinflation.